Let me tell you from the start that I consider this issue of Britain remaining or not remaining in the European Union probably the most important geo-economic and geopolitical issue we are now confronting. I think the consequences are hard to imagine if there was a Brexit. The honest answer to this issue is that some of the consequences we do not know. Because this is this kind of decisions and the facts that can have ripple consequences, and some of them unanticipated. So while, of course, on the political debate, people appear to pretend that they know everything that's going to happen, and of course also even in academic terms, that temptation may happen, I think the honest answer is that we do not know everything that will happen. Because if you consider now the challenges that the European Union is facing, and we know how difficult some of those challenges are, from the economic and social situation to geopolitical threats, either in the south or in the east, the issue of the refugees, massive influx of refugees, that in fact it's not a European crisis, it's a crisis in the neighborhood of the European Union, but of course it poses a specific challenge to Europe, to the problems of illegal migration, to the threats of terrorism. If you ask me what is the most difficult issue for Europe, I think will be Brexit. Because not only that will have an impact in terms of the economic confidence, not only in Britain but in Europe, specifically in the financial sector, but not only in the financial sector, but geopolitically, of course, it will have very important consequences because it will be seen as a defeat for Europe. That is quite clear. The United Kingdom is the fifth economy in the world, a little bit above French economy. It is a permanent member of the Security Council of the UN. It is one of the credible countries in terms of defense in Europe. It is, of course, a country with an extensive international network, and now, if I may also express that opinion, I think probably the country that has the best foreign service in the world. Now I'm speaking based on my experience in the foreign ministry of Portugal of 8 years. I think by all the diplomacies I've been watching, not only in Europe but outside, I think the United Kingdom is the best because it combines not only a great outreach and network, but also the agility that sometimes bigger countries do not have. The United Kingdom is also home to the English language and the English culture, the British culture in general. That is today the English language, the lingua franca, not only in Europe, but in the world, with a great soft power, if to use the well-known qualification. It is also London. Today it is the capital, financial capital of Europe, and certainly one of the most important, if not the most important, financial center in the world. London being, of course, also a very important cosmopolitan city, and Britain being one of the most open countries in the world in terms of trade. So all this, of course, it will be lost for the European Union in the case the United Kingdom would leave. Another point that is less mentioned, of course, the British debate, but I think it's important in Europe, is what would be the consequences in terms of the balance of power in Europe. Probably this is not politically correct to mention now, but I'm so happy that now I'm no longer speaking in an official capacity. So I can tell that since I left official functions and I'm now in academia, my level of sincerity is increasing day by day. And I can speak with much more openness. The reality is that the European Union, while being, of course, a union with very strong principles of solidarity, it's also a union of states. And there are, of course, rapport de force. There are different degrees of influence. And why, can we ask, why would all countries, smaller or big, or namely medium-sized countries, want Britain to remain in the European Union? One of the reasons that probably is not always stated is that because Europe does not, the European countries do not want to have a hegemonic power. Recently there was an important change of the influence of member states in the European Union, I watched that directly. I can compare. For instance, when we were, because I was a young foreign minister in the 90s, in 92 we were 12 countries. When at the time of Mitterrand, of Kohl, of Delors, of González, and many others, the rapport de force was one. Today, with 28, is different. And certainly, from an economic point of view, Germany is by far the most influential country. But Germany, strategically, is making a very important calculation and strategy that is refraining its own power, including, by the way, in the financial sector. While Germany has shown great loyalty to the European project, and I think it's not only thanks to exceptional leadership of Angela Merkel, but it's a decision of the, let's say, mainstream political system in Germany that goes from the CDU to the Greens, including the Social Democrats, the SPD, and the Liberals and the Greens. Germany has made a commitment to Europe that I really believe it is sincere. At the same time, most of the European Union countries, and don't forget that the huge majority of the European Union countries will be qualified as smaller or medium-sized countries. People always, in the political debate, people usually speak about France, Germany, the UK, Italy, but they forget that the majority of the countries in Europe have 10 or 11 million people or less. And those countries will not like to see an hegemonic Germany or an hegemonic France. And Britain being part is essential, from my point of view, for some kind of balance we need in Europe. Also some kind of balance in terms of the indispensable synthesis. Because we don't want, I would say now the majority of the European countries, we don't want to have Europe only following one major Weltanschauung or paradigm. We want to have this kind of combination. That is sometimes very difficult to manage. Sometimes it's frustrating, the time it takes to come to a consensus, but at the end, I believe it works. Now, I'd like to address quickly some arguments that I've seen in the debate, and I tell you very frankly my opinion on those debates very succinctly. Afterwards, if there is time, I'll be happy to answer your questions or your comments. There are 8 points, very quick. First, trade. What will be the consequences on trade? I think President Obama made it clear, and so I hope this message was well understood. It will be extremely difficult for Britain, in case there is a Brexit, to negotiate an agreement with the US, and certainly it will take time. I had the honor to be launching these TTIP negotiations with President Obama. In fact, it was in the margins of a G8 summit in Loughborough in Northern Ireland. Prime Minister Cameron also made a statement at that occasion. In fact, it was launched in 2013, June 2013, but in fact, the decision to launch it was taken in the margin of the G8 summit in Camp David in 2012, where we met at the end of the G8 with European Union members present there. So myself and my colleague from the European Council and the prime ministers or heads of government of state from UK, France, Germany, and Italy, we met President Obama, and then we decided it was still before his re-election that after his re-election we'll be launching it. Okay, but look, 2012, we are in 2016, and we are not yet seeing the end of the negotiations. So, trade negotiations, I think no one that is, common sense will say that they take a lot of time. And this is certainly true. But it's not only the issue of trade with the United States and the non-presence of the UK in a possible TTIP. It is also what could happen to the agreements that have been already signed or that are in the process of concluding between the European Union and other parties. And that argument I have not yet seen developed. For instance, recently we have made, it was in fact my commissions made agreements with Korea, it's already in force, Singapore, Colombia, with Peru. Many others are, negotiated, but still not yet completely enforced, like the very important agreement with Canada. So, of course, those agreements, Britain will no longer be part of those agreements. So, at least the uncertainty that will coming from this fact, it will have to be managed, and certainly, and if that's the only time I can use the word certainly, it will take time. It will create doubts in terms of trade, and also it's not good for the economic situation of our countries. Second issue about immigration and freedom of movement. Of course, the freedom of movement is a basic principle of the European Union. It's closely linked with the internal market, and that will be part of the deal. So we cannot have one member in the country, in the European Union, that does not respect fundamental principle of freedom of movement. But the argument that says that this limits our capacity to deal with immigration, frankly, I do not agree with it. Because the member states, namely those who are out of Schengen, but also those who are in Schengen, but those out of Schengen, they keep all the instruments they have, all the sovereignty principles, to fight against illegal migration, to fight against organized crime, to fight against transnational crime. By the way, I personally believe, and also starting my experience as Secretary for Security in my own country in the 80s, the more important issue in fighting international crime and international terrorism is the capacity of cooperation between different national services of security or intelligence. That's, by the way, we Portuguese have dealt with our Spanish friends when it was a part of the threat of Basque terrorism coming to Portugal, something that people don't speak because we avoided it. And we avoided it not with legislation or regulation, but through extremely intimate cooperation between the police services and the security and intelligence systems of both countries on the basis of confidence and trust. So the way to deal and to defeat the international networks of criminals and terrorism is not at all to close borders, as some people suggest, because those borders can always be crossed one way or the other. It's not by now putting a border between Belgium and France that will diminish the threat of terrorism in Europe. It is by increasing and making it more professional the capacity of articulation between the security services and intelligence services of the concerned countries. There is also, I've seen an argument that afterwards, since there will probably be new enlargements in Europe, there will be Britain will have to deal with these more migrants. That argument forgets one thing. Any enlargement of the European Union requires unanimity. So Britain could perfectly oppose any further enlargement if Britain wants to avoid further enlargement of Europe. Britain can do that if it remains in the European Union. Of course, it cannot do it if it goes out, because it's a unanimity decision. So any country has a veto possibility. In fact, and Britain, as one of the biggest countries, in fact, will have a major impact on that debate. I'm not suggesting that we should avoid any other enlargement. I'm saying that it's a dishonest argument, at least, to say that Britain will be forced to accept any enlargement. And by the way, now being more concrete, if there is, and I hope will be other enlargements, at least with some Balkan countries, certainly the conditions have changed, and the negotiation with those countries will imply different periods of transitions from what we had in the past with other countries. The third argument is about what will happen if Brexit happens in terms of negotiation of a new settlement. Some people I've heard say, oh, it will be very easy, it will be very quick. Come on, that's a contradiction. The same people that criticize Europe because Europe is not effective and takes too much time in taking decisions, 6 years to take a decision on a regulation, which by the way is true, it happens very often. Some regulations take 6 years or more to adopt because of the very complex system we have, Commission proposing, the Council and the Parliament. The same people who say the European Union is so ineffective, they believe the European Union will be so effective that we'll solve this in 2 years. Frankly, I mean, this argument can only be presented either by bad faith, ignorance, or probably both. One thing we know, it will be extremely difficult, this kind of negotiation. Why? Not only because of the huge technicalities involved including on very sensitive matters from customs to trade, but the political matters. Look at what will be the position of the countries that will remain. They will not like to open new presents for others. So it will be certainly at least very, very complex and lengthy. So possibly also with difficult consequences in terms of confidence, overall confidence in the economy here and, by the way, also in Europe. There is another argument about security in terms of, geopolitical security. The European Union is not recognized as a very important power in geopolitical terms, but let me tell you that in many important issues recently, the European Union played a very important role. Look at the sanctions against Russia after the invasion of Ukraine and annexation of Crimea. Can anyone suggest that one country taking sanctions alone has the same impact of 28 countries? And look at the position of the European Union on Iran. First adopting the sanctions, which were extremely difficult for some member states because it was really harmful for their immediate economic interests, and afterwards the possibility that the European Union was, in negotiations, indeed playing a crucial role. Of course, not replacing the indispensable role of the United States. Now, all these matters, in terms of security, I think have to be thought when we discuss the consequences of Britain leaving the European Union. By the way, Prime Minister Cameron, I was quite happy when I listened to him, because in the past it seems to me that debate here in the UK was more about the economic, and the European was seen more as an economic entity. But Prime Minister Cameron said clearly that it's also a matter of national security, and I believe it is. The question is, who is going to commemorate if Britain leaves? I tell you, in the Kremlin there will be a huge commemoration. Also, Le Front National in France, they will commemorate. But from a geopolitical point of view, I think it's important for us to think what think the friends of Britain, from the United States to Australia to Canada to Portugal, if I may, to the other European countries, and what think those who have not been so friendly with Britain, like the current government in Russia. So those who are supporting, and with all respect for their position, because I know some of them are arguing this position from what they consider a very important vital interest for Britain, but those who are arguing in favor of Brexit, what do they say when their company outside can only be with the kind of people their mothers would not like to see them with? Because this is the reality. They are in very bad company internationally. So I think in terms of security and defense, certainly it will be a blow for Europe if Britain leaves the European Union. There is another point, it's my sixth point, about the level of influence a country, Britain, could have in the European Union when it does not belong to the core, the so-called Euro core. And so what is the role of leadership that Britain has in the European Union? Or put it more frankly, what influence, what power has in the European Union a country that has been sometimes a reluctant member? Then, once again, you can look at history. In fact, Britain has been leading the European Union in many areas. Margaret Thatcher, that was not considered the greatest enthusiast for Europe, in fact was shaping the European agenda probably more than most European leaders. The agenda for the enlargement and the agenda for the internal market was basically put forward thanks to British leadership. If you read the famous Bruges speech, that was there. Apart from, of course, great efforts of Lord Cockfield and many others. So Britain has indeed been having a central role in the European Union and the European community. From Thatcher, those major issues, enlargement and the internal market, and in fact the fight against internal protectionism, to, Blair, I can tell you very frankly that without British leadership, we could not have the climate change success we had recently in Paris. And it was the European Union that started. Finally, the Americans and the Chinese joined us, but they were not ready in Copenhagen. It was the European Commission in 2007 that put forward the most ambitious program to combat climate change in the world, the famous 20-20-20. 20% reduction of greenhouse gas compared to 1990, the 20% gains in energy efficiency, the 20% in renewables. But I can tell you, based on my concrete experience, at that time, many of our member states were completely unenthusiastic, if I may use the word. They were not supportive of that. But Britain leadership, and especially Prime Minister Blair, made it possible to gather the necessary consensus. Of course, the European Commission worked very hard for it, also trying to have a negotiation where everyone could get its part, namely on terms of energy security and other issues. So, with Thatcher, with Blair, with Gordon Brown, the G20, the financial that took place here in London, Gordon Brown has shown great leadership. He was Prime Minister for a very short period, but I can tell you, and now I'm free from any political consideration, to tell you frankly that he played, and of course, he could play it because he was not only the leader of the UK, a very important country, but one of the most important leaders in the opinion. And even David Cameron, that has been, of course, spending most of his political capital in negotiations for a settlement, but the current agenda in the European Union, in fact it was launched also by the previous Commission, but that this Commission now is following about better regulation, reducing red tape for business, to a large extent, this is, once again, a very important point of the British agenda. So I think this is not sufficiently known, sometimes in the debate here, how much the British have been shaping the reformed European Union. How important it is, namely after this enlargement, because this is the European Union of the 28. It's no longer the European Union of the 10 or the 12. It's a different Europe one we have. And in fact, and that's my 7th point, I think the British settlement, the negotiations that were negotiated by the British government and the rest of the European Union, the other member states, while not perfect, and of course they left many of the more integrationists unhappy, but in fact they respond to a question that we were trying to address, even if there was not the issue of UK. And by the way, the European Commission has made some comments well before that debate. Our point was, how can we, in a union of 28 countries today, but with the 19 members in the euro area, keep this whole thing running and working? How can it be? Our idea was, in the Commission, that we should pursue more integration across the euro area. Indeed, it's essential. If you want to keep a common currency, you need more steps in terms of integration. Let me tell you very frankly. In the most acute moments of the so-called euro crisis, nobody was asking us, when we were in the G20, when we were discussing this matter with our American friends, or with the Chinese, or with the Japanese, or with the Russian. I remember when President Putin was asking me if he should sell the euros because more than 20% of his reserves were in euros, and I told him it would be better if he could pay attention to the rebels. Okay. When they were all of them concerned about the euro, predicting the implosion of the euro and things like that, and predicting, by the way, everybody was predicting at that time Brexit. Apparently they were not right, at least it did not happen yet. And the reality was, what they were asking us was not about the deficit of Greece. They were asking us, are you going for a further integration in the euro area? Are you going to be, what is the position of Germany? Is Germany ready to support more integration, I mean, in fiscal terms? So for me it's clear that for the euro area countries we need more integration. But it is also clear that not all members of the European Union will join the euro. It's not only Britain, other countries, namely we have the case of Denmark and probably other countries like Sweden that are not ready or do not want to join the euro. In that case, we need to have a system of unity and diversity. So we need a European Union of 28 that has more diversity so that it can cope with this complexity that it's facing now. That's why I believe the model that was decided, even I believe it's not perfect, it's the best one to resolve this issue. And to keep the basis of legitimacy in the internal market in the 28 countries. and not to have a kind of an euro area against the rest. For instance, recently there was an important case where we saw the opposition between the British government and the ECB. And the case was gained by the British government in the European Court of Justice. Why? Because the reference of legitimacy for the European Court of Justice, rightly, is the internal market, is the membership to the European Union, and not only the euro area. Basically, that is the issue. Of course, if Britain leaves the European Union, it will no longer be part of the internal market of the European Union. It will no longer be a member of the European Union. In that case, the European Court of Justice will not be able to decide in favor of Britain. And that brings me to the last point, is the financial sector. The financial, of course, London will always remain, whatever happens to this vote, a very important financial sector for the vocation, for the experience, for the know-how, also because Britain is a very important country in terms of rule of law. I think that's fair to say that it will remain. But it will no longer be the financial capital of Europe. It's not possible to be out of Europe and to be leading the financial sector of Europe. Because in that case, some of the positions that the financial actors in Britain have today of free access to the internal market of Europe, including some very important technical issues, but in so-called financial perspective, they will immediately disappear. And by the way, Germany, that has been showing extraordinary restraint, for instance, avoiding a stronger role for Frankfurt, naturally Frankfurt will become the financial capital of Europe. That's more than obvious, if the Brexit would occur. So I think that's also an important issue. So, all this, while there are many other effects that we cannot predict, and as I've told you at the beginning of my remarks, the only honest answer is say that we don't know. I think at least these consequences is fair to predict. Apart, of course, from another general point, is that we will be weaker. In the 21st century, dimension counts. Today, we see the blocks emerging, United States, China, India, and others. And one country of 40, 50, 60, even 80 million people like Germany, it's the biggest country in the European Union, with all the respect for those countries, on their own, and that's a matter of power. It's a question of realpolitik. They simply do not have the leverage to discuss in the same level with the giants like the United States or China. China will have 1.3 billion people. That's a question of life. All the countries deserve the highest respect for their history, for their culture, but they do not have the same power. But European Union, I really believe, based on also the experience, that it is a way of the countries projecting more power, not the formal sovereignty of the 19th or the 20th century, but real power in terms of influence, of shaping a possible world order. And I really believe that for the European countries, the capacity to project power together, it's indeed the best way to protect our interests and also to promote our values. I thank you for your attention.